our commander, Colonel Sean McFarland, now Lieutenant General retired Sean McFarland, had been basically given the instructions to retake the city of Ramadi from Al-Qaeda. And to do that, he had a handful of his own units, myself being the only one of his maneuver battalions. He brought his artillery battalion, his engineers, his support battalion, my battalion, and then had a bunch of other people attached to him from Marine and Army, other Army units. As a military historian, there's certain conflicts that register with me. And certainly when I think of urban combat, I think of Stalingrad in the Second World War. And that's sort of the impression you got when you arrived in Ramadi. Not only could any step get you killed or misstep from the IED threat or from snipers, but also just the level of devastation was akin to what you see in today's news cycle when you look at some of the worst of the cities in Ukraine. Just widespread devastation across the city.
Welcome to another episode of Bets and Badges. Today we've got a great show, a show that will intrigue anyone who has ever wanted to learn more about our military commanders and anyone who is ever intrigued about the U.S. military efforts in the theater of Iraq, the Middle East, following the attack on our nation, 9/11. I am Robert Asensio, and it is my great honor to introduce you to an American hero, Colonel Vincent J. Tedesco III. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm well.
Let's jump into, first, for the viewers' benefit, your experiences in Ramadi, Iraq. So you were the task force commander, the bandits, the 137th Armored Regiment that dates back to World War II. Legendary regiment. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in Iraq so we can get this conversation going, sir.
So first of all, I'm just one soldier of many, and it was my privilege and honor to earn the opportunity to command the 1st Battalion, 37th Armored Regiment in combat. To command it at all was a privilege. To command it in combat was just the culminating experience, the best experience of my military career. The 37th Armored Regiment and the 137 date back to 1940s, as you pointed out. If your viewers are familiar with the name Abrams, as in the Abrams tank, the first commander of the 37th Armored Battalion, from which our regiment and battalion stems, was Creighton Abrams. And he commanded the battalion with enormous distinction under Patton in the 4th Armored Division during the Second World War. And they accomplished many things that are perhaps the most accomplished and legendary tank battalion in United States Army history, including relieving the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, and many, many other things, but those are the things they're most well remembered for. And so to inherit the mantle of leading an organization with that kind of pedigree was an enormous honor and an enormous privilege. And so we were slated to deploy to Iraq in January of 2005. We initially deployed to the western border of Iraq, between Iraq and Syria, where we were responsible, the battalion alone was responsible for the Iraqi-Syrian border from the Turkish lands up north of the Euphrates and all the way down to the Tigris. It was just a large, empty swath of desert with a handful of towns and villages and a lot of smuggling and infiltration. And we were up there for about 4 months before the decision was made to move the brigade combat team, of which we were a part, 1st Brigade, 1st Armored Division, to move to the city of Ramadi, Iraq, which is in the heart of Anbar. It's the capital of Anbar province, and it was a major center for the insurgency. It's adjacent to the city of Fallujah, which had already had the first Battle of Fallujah, and they were in the process of executing the second Battle of Fallujah as well, which is famous for the urban combat, much like the United States military had seen in Hue during the Vietnam War and many other places around the world in our history. But it was much more intense than your average experience for folks in Iraq at that time. Anyway, we were sent down there in May, and in June of 2005, we kicked off offensive operations. We were the main effort for the brigade initially. We conducted an assault across a railroad bridge over a canal to seize foothold in the city, to isolate it from the south, then conducted over a series of months offensive operations where we would go into the city, we'd seize a piece of a neighborhood basically and move in, and we wouldn't leave. And we would operate from there, doing patrols to find, fix, and finish insurgents, and also patrols to census the locals, get to know their needs, their wants, and understand them because they're the terrain upon which counterinsurgency is waged. And basically, it was called the ink blot strategy after the fact. We seize a spot and then we sort of spread out from that. We did that repeatedly until we frankly just ran out of forces. And that took us more than a few months. And then in February of 2007, had largely secured uh, the main part of the city of Ramadi in conjunction with the other units in the brigade combat team that were doing similar things. And we rotated out and got to come back to Germany.
Yeah, so that's a simple explanation, but I want to go a little deeper because under your command,
Sure.
your troops were responsible setting up the combat outpost. Your troops
Right.
were responsible for stopping a massacre, if you will, of the civilian population and attacks on U.S. forces, deadly attacks. Tell us about your experiences, because I know that, you had said something to me some time back, and it sticks with me. The media shows or portrays Iraq or Ramadi, the Anbar province, as one thing, but it was quite different being there. Give us a sense of that, sir.
So, as you already alluded to, prior to us moving down there, there was a famous article in Newsweek, which at the time was a major news outlet, not the rump that's left of it today, in which they described Ramadi as the most dangerous city in Iraq. Basically, the heart of the insurgency had been evicted from Fallujah and moved into uh, Ramadi. And from Ramadi, it was the Sunni insurgency in particular was waging a very deadly campaign against U.S. forces and also against the other people in Iraq, the different religions, not just Muslim, but other religions that were there. Um, when we made 4 trips, I think we made 4 trips down before we actually moved down there, where the leaders would fly in from the brigade and we would talk to the soldiers who were there in the brigade we were going to relieve. And the brigade we were relieving was a Pennsylvania Army National Guard brigade composed of troops from a variety of different states. They had basically been outposted at different spots around the perimeter of the city and secured the government center, which is where the governor of Anbar lived and worked. And there was a Marine battalion that had no other purpose in life at that point than to secure the governor and the government center. And they were in it every day in the brutal fights. Other than that, the brigade was posted 2 highways, one that passed north of the city on the northern edge, and one that went through downtown right past the government center, with the idea of securing those so that supplies could be moved in and out of country along those routes. We would fly down there. First thing is we would fly in on American Army helicopters, and we would fly in daylight, and we would land, and the Marines and the guys who were there already would think we're crazy because of the threat of the helicopters being downed by anti-aircraft weapons, missiles, and the like. And they only flew at night, and that's pretty much what our experience was once we got down there. But inevitably, we flew in there in rooftop level. We got down, we got on the ground, we went out and looked at different things, talked to different people as the brigade pulled together its plan for how it would come into the city and had postured itself prior to beginning operations. Our commander, Colonel Sean McFarland, now Lieutenant General retired Sean McFarland, had been basically given the instructions to retake the city of Ramadi from Al Qaeda, but to do it in a way that didn't attract the attention that and media scrutiny that had been focused on the brutality, in your face brutality of the fight that unfolded over a relatively short period of time in the much smaller city of Fallujah. And to do that, he had a handful of his own units, myself being the only one of his maneuver battalions. He brought his artillery battalion, his engineers, his support battalion, my battalion, and then had a bunch of other people attached to him from Marine and Army, other Army units. As a military historian, there's certain conflicts that registered with me. And certainly when I think of urban combat, I think of Stalingrad in the Second World War. And that's sort of the impression you got when you arrived in Ramadi. Not only could any step get you killed or misstep, from the IED threat or from snipers, but also just the level of devastation was akin to what you see in today's news cycle when you look at some of the worst of the cities in Ukraine. Just widespread devastation across the city, particularly at the points where roads intersected or were frequently trafficked. But generally speaking, and this is a broad generalization, I don't mean to offend anybody whose experience might have been different, but at that point in the war in Iraq, the approach the United States military had adopted was focused on putting soldiers and Marines into large bases on the periphery of cities, and then moving out from those daily to conduct patrols to do the business of counterinsurgency, which sounds great and works great from the standpoint of protecting your people to some degree. But it doesn't do so great that every time you're commuting to war, you're exposing yourself to the risks of the IEDs and the ambushes and all that stuff along the way. When we first got up north into northern Iraq, we fell in on the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, where Colonel H.R. McMaster and his troopers had taken a different approach to a similar problem set in the much smaller city of Tal Afar, excuse me. And there they had pioneered this idea of, instead of commuting to war, move into the city and stay, operate among the people, and again, do this ink blot thing. And that requires a level of trust and commitment and resourcing to small unit actions that is not normally the case when you're doing these large commute to war type of things. We're just sitting at a big base surrounded by concrete, barbed wire, and that kind of thing. It was very successful for 3rd ACR. It got the attention of our commander, Colonel McFarland, and he saw it as a pattern of our system operation that was different, that could be employed in the city of Ramadi and employed with success. So we went to school on how 3rd ACR operated. We took the tactics, techniques, and procedures they had developed, and we brought them down. We fused them with the things we learned from the National Guard Brigade. For example, all of our Humvee gun turrets were just the normal factory gun turrets. They were just low steel turrets with machine guns or whatever weapon you had in them. They had what they called Pope glass, where they took armored Humvee windows and they welded them on around the upper edge of the gun turret to provide a transparent armored enclosure to better protect the gunner from the effects of IEDs and small arms fire. And so we adopted that, for example, and many other things from that organization. And the fusion of the two produced a powerful tactical system that we evolved as we learned, that yielded a considerable amount of success in a very dangerous and bloody fight.
People think of professionals as yourself as leaders that are unapproachable. And what I see from you is that you were pretty much a commander, a hands-on commander, where you were engaged with the troops, man. You were going from one part of the city to the other, the entire area of operations. Let's talk a little bit about that. I know that the affinity that your troops have for you, those that I've spoken to that served under your command, is great. They have this immense respect for you and admiration. But how did that environment, that specific mission affect you personally? What were you going through?
Well, I mean, I'm human too. I had a wife and a daughter back in the States, and I sure as hell wanted to see my daughter graduate from high school and go off to college and get married and have children. And I wanted to grow with my wife, all the things I'm able to do now, fortunately. But at the time, that wasn't assured given the violence of the environment in which we were operating in my chosen profession and the role I was playing. As a leader, there's an expectation that your subordinates, whether you're a first responder or a soldier or other form of military personnel, will have, that the leaders share the dangers of their subordinates and they lead from the front. That is the best tradition of leadership in both the first responder and military communities. And there's a reason for that, because that is proven to work. It is proven to show and inspire people to do things when things are hard, and it's easy to get focused in on your fear in that moment or your concerns and other things. So that's what I tried to do. And, I'm human. I didn't always do it well, but I made an effort at it every day. And, there's a lot of different aspects we will talk about, I'm sure, that went into how I approached the job of being a leader in combat. But I'm the son of a soldier. I watched my father's military career unfold. I watched the success he enjoyed in Vietnam as a commander in combat. And, as a young boy, I wanted to be him. And I'm fortunate that not only do I have a genetic material and the experience of being raised by him and the rest of my family, but I was pretty well equipped when I chose to be a soldier. And I've devoted my entire life since I could read to studying war and humans and the experience of war. And I'm also a fairly earnest individual in that every waking moment that I spend studying that, I try to draw lessons and ideas and profit from that experience so that I could do my job better. And when I said that the zenith of my professional career was not the rank that I had attained or a particular job, the zenith was commanding the opportunity to command soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen in combat in Ramadi in a battle that mattered, a battle that was intense, and it caused me to test myself as a leader in ways in which I turned out to be fairly well prepared for. Um, yeah, you have to be worthy of the men and women you're leading. And if you're focused on the men and women you're leading and not focused on yourself, you'll do better. And I certainly had the experience the longer we were there, and we were extended, as you know. We were originally deployed on a 12-month deployment, and then after more than a few months in Ramadi, we were extended an additional 2 to 3 months to give time for the unit they had identified to replace us to be able to rotate back into theater. And at that time, brigades were turning very quickly. You'd do a deployment, you come home, you'd be back for maybe 9 to 12 months if you're lucky, most of which you spend training up and preparing and rebuilding the team before you deployed again. It was a brutal cycle, and it was sustained for a long time during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. But everything was driven by when your relief could be on site and who they chose to be your relief. With some irony, I ended up being the guy who managed that for the Army for 3 years when I was at U.S. Army Forces Command. It's called the patch chart, and it's the whole science of identifying who comes next and where they go, and doing that in conjunction with the supported commanders. But anyway, long way of getting right to the fact that at a certain point after we got extended, as you got closer and closer to the end of when you knew you were supposed to leave, it gets harder and harder to fight those fears. So Ramadi and most of urban areas in Iraq and generally in that region tend to be filthy cities in that you throw your trash over the wall because there's no garbage man who comes around every Monday and empties your cart for you, right? There's none of that infrastructure, or if it ever existed, had long since been abandoned in Ramadi in particular. So the result is the environment you're in is covered by debris and dust and things that are all used by your enemy to hide explosive devices meant to kill you or do other things that facilitate their ability to kill you. So that wears on you because that requires a level of hypervigilance and attention by you and every other member of your little team to get through move any distance, anytime, under any conditions. And that wears on you. And so the bottom line is that I kept busy because of my role and responsibility and my sense of duty, and that in turn allowed me to be too busy to focus much on the things that were happening around me, where the bullets were and where the explosions were and other things like that. But that got harder and harder the longer, deeper we got back into the environment. And as I've said another time, and just tack it on here, I was fortunate. I was a lieutenant colonel, task force commander, so I had a whole team of people whose whole job in life was to protect me. So I had a team of men that rode in my truck and in escorting trucks when I went forward in my truck. And when I got out of on the ground and started walking around, they moved around me in this little cloud to keeping people and things away from me that I didn't want to have near me. They didn't think belonged there. And also when I was out on my tank, I had my tank crew, but we always had other vehicles with me. So I was well protected and well insulated from many of the dangers that the real heroes of the story, those young 18, 20-year-old, 25-year-old soldiers who are out walking patrols, standing guard every day, every night, and they're the only people taking care of their protection. They're the heroes. I was just playing my role.
Now I can see why your troops those that I've come in contact with really like you because, man, you're as open as you can be. And thank you for that.
That's an important thing. I mean, as a leader, it's important to be genuine. People can see through when you're playing a role in an act that's not represent who you are, your values. People see that. So, basic tenet of leadership, as far as I'm concerned, is being genuine because people will respond to that.
100%. And, recently you and I have had an opportunity to collaborate with a few others on a documentary that's forthcoming. It's called Out of the Fire into the Light, the 20-year journey since the 2006 second battle for Ramadi, or of Ramadi, the troops' specific platoon, Thunder Platoon, members of the Thunder Platoon, and how they have survived for the last 20 years post their war experience. And I can't thank you enough because you've opened up some doors. There have been some invaluable lessons, and it's a journey of healing, of which I must tell you, I myself have benefited. My healing has been, contributed to this project. So I hope that others will be able to benefit in sharing and the experiences and really learning a little bit more about our fellow American heroes who have placed it all on the line, man, and still are suffering and fighting to this day, 20 years later, to survive and maintain some sense of normality of life, right? So I thank you. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your preparedness. So you're a graduate of Penn State University, right? You got your bachelor's, you got your master's. I take it you're still a Penn State fan and a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Am I right?
That's correct.
Yeah, lifer.
I,
So, please.
well, both my parents went to Penn State. I went to Penn State. My wife went to Penn State. My aunts and uncles went to Penn State. My daughter is a Penn State graduate. My son-in-law is a Penn State graduate. My brother and sister are both Penn State graduates. Yeah, we have very deep ties to that community, and we have a tradition in the Army ROTC program there that dates back 3 generations. We have an endowment in our name, so we have deep connections to Penn State University. I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to get my initial training there as a cadet officer and to be connected with that program. So I was fortunate. I had a 4-year scholarship, went to Penn State, came out of that, was commissioned an armored cavalry officer and assigned to the east-west German border in the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, which was one of the 2 cavalry regiments that patrolled the east-west German border in the American sector during the Cold War. And it was a great experience. I was there when the wall came down, so I saw that all firsthand. Learned from a lot of tremendous leaders, really set my career off in the right direction because it was with high standards and a great tradition that sort of propelled me forward, gave me a lot to build on moving forward.
Yeah, that was an immense period of pride when that wall came down. I mean, I enlisted in '83, and our enemy was the Russians, the anybody who was on the communist side. And then to see that wall, which we never thought would come down in '89, was it came down. How was that? I mean, did you guys know that it was happening?
Yeah, if you're aboard a cavalry regiment, you spend a lot of time on the border. So when you're not shooting gunnery or doing maneuver training, you're gone 270 days a year, and a good third of that is spent literally patrolling the border and staring across at the people who are your enemies and seeing, what people under communism were living like. It was much realer and more tangible because most soldiers stationed in Europe couldn't even get within a kilometer of that border, and I operated within that 1K zone all the time because that was our mission, myself and all the other troopers of the regiment. So that was really cool. As it relates to the fall of the Berlin Wall and sort of the opening of that border, it had been simmering for some time, but on the night in question when it actually opened, I was with my fellow lieutenants at a bar we like to haunt in downtown Fulda when the staff duty van, which is a Volkswagen microbus that was used by the staff duty officer for the squadron, was sent down because they knew we would be there, and they collected us up in a semi-inebriated state in civilian clothes, threw us in the van. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in the squadron conference room, and we're talking about how we're going to respond to this change in the situation. Obviously, we already had a cavalry troop that was up on the border securing it, but now we need to roll out more stuff and do a bunch of other things. So it was a very memorable night. And I was glad I was there to see both the bad times and the start of good times in Europe. I've been back since. I was there in December 1990 on my way out the door to the first Gulf War, and got to visit, go into the tower that was opposite of our border camp and see what these German border troops could see of us, and walk their border defenses and do things I could only see with my eyes. I got to touch with my hands and tread with my feet, which was cool. And I would subsequently served in Germany again. Briefly got to go up to the old border and see what's left of it. But that was an interesting time to be alive. Very
Do you have a
fortunate.
piece of the wall? Do you have
I do. I
any
have a piece of
remnants
the
of the wall?
wall. I have a piece of the wall. I have a piece of the border fence. I have I don't know if you can't see it up above me. There's one of the 1 kilometer warning zone warning signs. I originally had that on the barber pole, the white PVC pole with the red top, but actually while I was in Ramadi, because we were deactivating my rear detachment, cleared out my office and decided to throw that pole away. Even though it was signed by all the other officers of my squadron as a parting gift they gave me as I was headed to the airport, which didn't work out so well, but eventually I got it home. But yeah, I got plenty of memorabilia from that time, because again, that was a foundational experience in my career, and I was lucky to be there.
Man, what a rich career. But it's a hard fought career because you had to bust your hump to be able to qualify for the command level positions that you had and earn the trust of the military and the personnel. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you enlist, and then I know that your master's is in American history, right? But then you went
American
on
military history.
to, and then you went on to get another master's. Am I correct, or is it just one?
That's correct. There's 2 masters.
Okay,
So
and
when
then the, mhm.
my career followed pretty much the standard pattern for a officer of the maneuver arms, armor infantry. I, did my lieutenant time in Germany. I came back, went to a school, and went to a fall. My next assignment was at Fort Riley, Kansas, with the First Infantry Division, the Big Red One, where I served in the Division Cavalry Squadron initially during the first Gulf War, and then commanded a cavalry troop back there at Fort Riley afterwards. And then after that, I was selected to go to West Point to teach history, and this was something I'd pursued. A very small percentage of the ROTC graduates out of every year get identified as potential faculty members and are afforded the opportunity, and you compete for those opportunities. But it was it allowed for 2 years of fully funded graduate school. So I was drawing my full pay and allowances as a captain of the United States Army, going back to Penn State for 2 years of graduate school, followed by a 3-year utilization tour teaching military history at West Point. So I got to do that. Now, my motivation for doing that was more than just my personal ambition to study history at a higher level and to teach it. It was also the fact that my wife was an Army nurse. She was commissioned a year after I was. And when I was in Germany on the border, she was in a town an hour and a half away where there was a hospital, an Army hospital. And she was working hours like I was working, but she was working different hours. So for the first, more than that, almost 4 years of our marriage, we didn't share a household. We lived in separate places. And Saddam Hussein made that all worse by screwing up our plan to come back to the States together. She got stop lost in Germany. I deployed from the United States to Iraq, fought in the war. And then through family connections and some stories that have been embellished to be the story of the $20 million baby, my wife got back to Fort Riley 4 days before I redeployed. And we were finally able to live together and start our real married life after 4+ years of marriage. That fed into the decision to go teach at West Point, because it was 5 years where I had a much more stable family environment in which to build a family, and which is what we did.
Tell us a little bit about her. Just man, because she deserves a plug. I mean, she served right alongside of you.
She did. She spent she served for 4 years, I think, all told. She got out when we were at Fort Riley after she served her commitment plus some. And as over the years has been drug all over the world by me, and has raised an exemplary daughter that we have, and at the same time has built a career since 2003, in particular as a breast cancer nurse navigator of tremendous accomplishment, and is been caring for women going through some of the most horrible experiences of their lives for a long time, and she's exceptionally good at it. In fact, she still works part-time for her surgeon back in Virginia. We live in Texas, as you know now, but they wanted her so much they kept her, and she's down the hallway from my office right now working. So she's an exceptional woman in many respects, and my partner in crime, and I'm honored and privileged to be able to be still with her after everything I put her through.
That. So, you know, for those viewing, if you haven't already seen it on the screen, we will have a link to the Colonel's personal page that does justice to his career. We can't do enough justice because we probably take up longer than we have allotted time to be able to speak to him about his career. But I wanted to move something, sir. Let's talk to leaders, up and coming leaders, the people that are in the trenches right now, the ones that have aspiration to rise to your level or just become leaders in general, both in the military and in the public sector. What advice can you give them?
So we already talked about the importance of being true to yourself. So you're going to bring to the role of leader the values that are inculcated by your family, the experiences you already have, your genetic material, all sorts of things are part of it. So I'll give you a very specific example. I am a short man. I am 5'3". That's because that's what my genes allowed me to be. And to be a leader in the Army and a combat leader when you're a small man, it presents a unique set of challenges because the assumption is don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, no matter how much time you spend in the gym. You don't fit any of the preconceived notions of what a combat leader looks like or is shaped like or anything else. And so I was cognizant of that and worked throughout my career to try to address that challenge head on and to use it as a point of leverage to my advantage. So classic cases, as I would come into command a unit, I would say I'd grab the tallest soldier and I'd stand him next to me and I would point out to the fact that I was the future of the Army because I was smaller, lighter, easy to deploy, and the bullet that passed over my head would strike him in the chest. Therefore, I was more survivable. Just any number. Those are sort of trivial examples, but the point is, as I said, you're going to come to the role of leadership as who you are. And there are things about yourself you're not going to be able to change, and you have to accept those, and you need to find ways to use the jujitsu of leadership, so to speak, to make those things advantageous or at least dispel the negative aspects of it. I think an underrated value that leaders should recognize is the importance of the golden rule, which is treat others as you want to be treated. If you approach the job of leading people by giving people the kind of leadership that you expect, you're probably close to 80% or better of the solution. Because there's a lot of bad leaders out there, let's be honest. And those leaders are ones that elevate themselves above their responsible people, the people they're responsible for in their mission, or they're more about their next advancement or something else like that. So again, if you focus on being yourself, on treating people the way they want to be treated, those are two really good ways to start out. I'd also advise people to learn from the best and the worst. So you're of the same age, so you probably had a little green memorandum notebook that the Army gave you with a black Skillcraft pen, and you carried that around all the time because some sergeant had told you were required to have that at all time, or in my case, some captain had told me that, right? And I use that notebook to keep notes on things I saw other leaders do that I thought were good and things that I thought were bad. Now, modern generation is probably doing that on an app in their phone or some other way. But the point here is that if you study the leaders around you and you shamelessly steal the things that they do that work well and conspicuously avoid the things that they do that don't work well, you're building on the tribal knowledge of leadership within your profession, and that will help advance you as well. I would say that there's other things. I mean, people are people, right? Whether it's 50 BC Roman soldiers or 21st century American firefighters, people are people. They expect leaders to do the same things, and it's really not that hard. The hard is not understanding what to do. The hard is doing it. So those things like giving clear direction, tell them what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and what the standard that is to be done is. Provide feedback. You're doing that well. You're not doing that well. Don't worry about their feelings. They want the feedback. hold yourself and others accountable to the standards that you articulate. If you said we're going to do it this way and you don't do it the right way and there's not a reason for it, then there should be consequences. And consequences are okay because that's how people learn. And you have to be consistent. Those are four broad things that I would describe as the basics of leadership. So provide clear direction, provide feedback, hold yourself and others accountable, and be consistent are four really basic leadership things to do. I would add that, you know, you have to be a believer. That can be hard depending upon what you're tasked to do as a leader, but you have to be a genuine believer. You know, I used to tell Iraqi tribesmen when we were in Nineveh, and I was talking to them, that I look forward to coming back to visit the Jeffersonian democracy on the banks of the Tigris. You know, they don't have any clue what democracy was, and I would go into this speech about how I was going to fly into Talafar Airport someday, bring my children, and come out to see this dusty, crappy little village that they lived in. And I said that because what I wanted for them was genuinely the opportunity to live free in a democratically governed nation that had escaped the effects of generations after generation of brutal dictatorships and tyranny. That's corny, but I believe that was something that was worth fighting for. I believe that was something that was worth my death if necessary, right? Is to get that for those people. And that's just one example. So the point is that you have to believe in what you're doing and you have to be genuine in it and you have to communicate that genuineness to your soldiers. They're going to have different ideas, or the people they're going to have different ideas and they're entitled to have those ideas. Your job is to merely represent the better angels, to give them something to inspire them and to keep going when they maybe don't want to go.
For those troops out there that are still suffering, they're still struggling with the trauma or the consequences of their experiences, that they're having a hard time dealing with those. Sir, let's give them some words of encouragement, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. We do generally, or we can do better.
So there's nothing natural about killing people, blowing things up, and watching the people around you get killed and blown up. There's nothing natural about that experience. And every individual brings to that experience and the aftermath of that experience their own background, their own values, and other things. And as a result, every individual everybody experiences it differently and everybody processes it differently. Way too many folks, despite the best efforts of many people, are so profoundly and adversely affected by their experiences that they seek relief in forms of medication, whether it's alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. They try to numb the pain as opposed to deal with the pain. And one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of the Out of the Fire documentary in particular is the fact that it shows that there are many, many different ways that you can find many tools available to you. And you have to just find the right tool, the tool that speaks to you, whether it's counseling, whether it's yoga, whether it's medication, whether it's anything. I don't care. What I care about is you finding a way to process the trauma that you've been through, a way that works for you in your context, where you sit today. And then as a result, moving forward on your journey. You know, just this past 2 weeks ago, we had a reunion of our regiment at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which I ran. And I ran into an individual there who I recognized, but I didn't really recognize. I saw that he had been in the battalion when I commanded it, but he left before we deployed, which didn't sound like a good thing. But I didn't put the name together. And we had a conversation about it, and he was talking about his journey and where he's at and how he's trying to heal. And I was encouraging to him, deliberately so, that I wanted to help him on that journey, because regardless of the circumstances under which he may or may not have left the service, I wanted him to be better. Turns out afterwards he shoots me an email and wants to make amends. And that prompted me to dig through my files. And it turns out this guy was somebody that I chaptered out of the Army, administratively separated from the Army, who in fact had been traumatized by his experience during the first deployment, and unbeknownst to me, was having difficulty processing it. It was doing it all the wrong ways through drugs and alcohol and misbehavior. And I don't hold a grudge against that individual. He served, at least it's for some period of time, honorably and well in the service of his nation. And he deserves the right of forgiveness and the right of being accepted as he sorts through the consequences of that service. And I wish him well, and hopefully I'll be able to work with him moving forward to help him get in that better place he's trying to reach. And I don't care if you're that guy or if you're the guy like my driver who was there with me every day, that took the ID blast with me, that, did all the things that I did. You're still my brother or my sister in the case of the women who were with us. We're all together. We went through this together. We need to see each other through the experience of coming out on the other side. And I'm glad there's lots of things available to us today that weren't there before.
100%. There you go. We have the words of Colonel Vincent J. Tedesco III, an American hero. Sir, we can't thank you enough. We come to the end of our show. You can catch us on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Amazon, Apple, iHeart, YouTube, or the Miami's community newspaper as betsandbadges.com. Emily Gonzalez, our producer behind the scenes, thank you. Michael Grant Miller, the Miami's community news team, we equally thank you. But more importantly, we thank you, the audience. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye now.